Welcome back everyone. Time for another year of reviews, and what better device to start off with than the iPhone 6s Plus. I'm actually covering the 6s and the 6s Plus this year right now on the first same day. And 2021, hopefully it's better for you than 2020 was, and how 2019 is better for you, I don't know. But with the 6s Plus, what's very interesting is that, first of all, I used this phone. This was like the second iPhone I ever used as a main device, and I loved it. I had a great time with it, and I can definitely tell you in this day and age, a phone of this size, the bigger the phone, the more future-proof it kind of is at this point. Even though Apple and a lot of other manufacturers are still making smaller phones, a bigger phone with that bigger screen and higher resolution really does add a lot more future ability to this type of device. Now, this is a 5-year-old phone, so it has depreciated quite a bit in value, but I'll find the cheapest one on Amazon, link it down below, but I'll probably leave some other iPhones linked down below too, and you can kind of sift through those ones for the price tag. You can help support the channel at the same time if you buy those. Now, on the front of the iPhone 6s Plus, we still have that 5.5-inch panel, so nothing has changed there. It's 1080p, it's full HD, and this is what I mean by, a bigger panel, better high resolution and stuff can, future-proof yourself. With phones like the iPhone 12 mini and the iPhone 12 and 12 Pro, the resolutions are higher than 1080p, but they're still kind of around the same. With the 6s, it's a lower end panel. With this one, it's a little bit higher, so that's definitely a huge asset for it. Now, you do have quite a bit of bezel around the whole entire display. Is it horrible? Kind of not. I mean, it definitely is a lot more, and the more and more further we go into each year, the less and less we see the amount of bezels on each phone. But I think it's totally okay, and it's totally justifiable when you remember that this phone came out in 2015. You still have that home button, which is totally fine. On the bottom, lightning port, which Apple is kind of set to remove. They may or may not. You have that headphone jack as well, which is still really cool to have on a device like this. And on the back, you have the aluminum build pretty much on this whole entire device. And then you have that single camera setup. Now, I will tell you, the feeling of this phone is still fairly premium. It doesn't feel like a cheap phone. It still feels like a fairly premium phone for the most part. Now, it doesn't have glass on the back or anything, and I really doubt 2021 phones are going to change it that much, so we're probably still going to see glass backs and all that stuff, but regardless, this phone is still going to be a pretty good phone when it comes down to the whole entire, feeling of it, I think, even in 2021. Now, with that single camera setup, it is a 12 megapixel sensor, which I actually do like a lot. I think it's a really, really good sensor when it comes down to it. You have the ability of shooting 4K videos at 30 frames per second, which that in and of itself I think is a huge plus for it. And you also have a 5 megapixel front facing camera. Now, one of the biggest downsides of this specific phone is the lack of additional sensors. You don't have a telephoto lens, you don't have an ultra wide sensor, but on top of that, you don't have 4K 60, you definitely don't have 8K, you don't have portrait mode or anything like that. But I will tell you, there's a lot of apps on the App Store, there's a lot of editing capabilities we have nowadays that can make a phone that looks like a 4 out of 10 and easily make it like a 7 out of 10. And even within iOS 14, it has a built-in, editor in the app itself, in the photo app, that you can actually go ahead and edit a lot of videos and photos that way too, and make the photos and videos look better, just stock, without even having to download an app. So that's another pretty big asset too. And I think day to day, if you had to use this phone as a main device, the camera itself would actually be pretty good. I really don't think it'd be that bad. Obviously, like I said, it's not perfect. The front camera, also no 4K on the front camera, only 720p, and that's another pretty big downside for it. I feel like a lot more people use, front cameras more than back cameras nowadays, but still, it has a camera, it functions, and for a majority of people out there, it'll probably get the job done. Again, it's not going to be perfect, but I think it's going to be okay for a ton of people. So in terms of how that camera holds up in 2021, that pretty much covers it up in that specific standpoint. Now, software-wise, this is probably going to be one of the biggest changes of the iPhone 6s Plus this year. When it first came out, it came out with iOS 9, which was, over 5 years ago. Right now, it did get iOS 14, which some people, and including me, didn't think it was going to get. But realistically, if I'm going to be honest with you guys, it's looking like this phone is going to be ending off with iOS 14. So the last version of iOS 14 that comes out, whether that's like iOS 14.4, 14.5, 14.6, whatever it is, realistically, it's probably going to be the last version of software that it's going to end off. It's not going to be getting iOS 15. So what does that mean? It basically means that this phone is not going to be getting all the features that iOS 15 is getting, and come this, June time frame, it's not going to be getting that next version of software. Now, is that the end of the world? Absolutely not, because realistically, like we saw before, with the iPhone 6, with the iPhone 5s, those continue to get updates even past their, realistic end date. So we had phones like the iPhone, 6S and above getting iOS 13 and 14, but the iPhone 6 and 5S were still getting updates. So that same thing could be happening with the iPhone 6S lineup, including the 6S Plus. So realistically, that's kind of what I see happening. This phone is still going to be getting security and supplemental updates, even when iOS 15 and potentially even when iOS 16 comes out. So in terms of that pretty much covers it up in the software standpoint. Now, performance-wise, this phone, when it first came out, had that Apple A9 chip inside of it, the dual-core CPU, and then 2 gigabytes of RAM on every single model that came out. Now, what I can tell you is that, first of all, the performance of this phone for a 5-year-old device in 2021 is still pretty good. Okay, I'll be completely honest. This phone is not like a 5 or 6-year-old Android device. I feel like with Androids, they age a little bit differently. Apple and these type of devices, they age so well that honestly, you can pick up a phone like an iPhone 4 or iPhone 3GS and still kind of feel like you have a pretty okay phone. Obviously, it's going to be a horrible experience, but the 6S Plus is not a horrible experience in 2021. It's still pretty good, and if it ends off with iOS 14 and nothing detrimental happens to the experience, you're going to have a really good time with it, in my opinion. Now, it's not that fast, and it's not, the best graphically performing device out there. To give you some examples, if you're playing a game, if you're playing Real Racing 3, you're going to see skip frames, you're going to see some glitches here and there, and if you're trying to open up Real Racing 3, you're going to have a faster experience on something like an iPhone 12. App opening speeds, smoothness, the gesture-based design, those things are huge added benefits to something like an iPhone 12 over an iPhone 6S Plus. However, the biggest difference is, in my opinion, that once those apps are loaded, once the iPhone 6S Plus has an app that's already loaded on it, it's pretty much you're good to go. If you have Snapchat loaded, if you have, Instagram or whatever you're going to go through, you're going to have a good time with it. Like, it's going to be almost the same. It's not until you get into those bigger apps and games that you start to see some more glitchness and skip frames and all that stuff. But on top of that, RAM management is another huge problem with these type of devices that are older. So realistically, the newer phones, you'll be able to multitask much better and much smoother from those type of devices than the iPhone 6S Plus. So that's another very big thing to keep in mind. But the smoothness is still there. The speed, I think, is kind of there too for a 5 or 6-year-old device. But honestly, I don't think anybody's planning on this thing being like the fastest performing phone anymore. So I think it's actually still pretty impressive in this day and age, if I'm being completely honest. So in terms of performance, that's honestly how I would kind of sum it up in 2021. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this phone stock had 2,750 milliamp hours. Now, the reason I say stock is because, a lot of these batteries have degraded over time, mine included. My battery is not at full 100% capacity. Realistically, it's around that. I think it's around like 80 something percent, probably even less than that. And I think if it was on stock, it would actually have a pretty decent battery life still, but it's really not that good anymore, and that's a pretty big disadvantage for these type of devices. So I'll probably tell you, in terms of the battery life, you're going to have a pretty okay experience. Like, it's not going to be that great, and iOS 14 has taken a toll on the battery life a little bit too, so that's another thing to keep in mind. But you can still replace it. You can do whatever you need to with the battery, and really any part of this phone too. It's pretty easy to use or replaceable. So to kind of sum up this video and say answer the question, is the iPhone 6S Plus still worth it in the later part or early part of 2021? What I can tell you is that I think the iPhone 6S Plus, how it holds up right now as a device as it is a pretty interesting device. It's not an extreme. It's not like it's a 10-year-old phone. It's right at that time frame where we started getting phones that, started having dual camera setups and, 1080p on the front and different things like that. And there's still some pros for the 6S Plus. I mean, for the time being, it's still getting support, which is really cool. It has a lot of capability in terms of iOS. We got those widgets, we got picture-in-picture, we got a lot of cool things that realistically we had a jailbreak before. And speaking about jailbreak, this phone still has that check rain jailbreak as well. And you can jailbreak any version of software that this phone gets. So that's another huge thing about the longevity of this device, that you can still download tweaks and all that stuff. You still have a very premium build quality to this phone at a fairly cheap price tag in the used market. I mean, this thing doesn't cost that much, if I'm being honest. The camera isn't horrible. It'll definitely get the job done. It's definitely not a huge aspect of it and not a huge pro, but it's definitely not a con in my opinion. The panel is pretty big on this type of phone too. You still have Force Touch, support for as long as you can until I think iOS 15 comes out. And I'll definitely tell you, it's not a bad phone, but it's definitely not the fastest phone. It's definitely not a fast phone. I would not classify this as being a fast phone. I would consider it more maybe like kind of a smooth phone. Definitely not the smoothest phone I would recommend or anything, but it's definitely a smoother phone than I would expect There's no 1080p on the front, there's no 4K 60 on the back, obviously quite a bit of bezel on the panel and everything, but I'll definitely tell you for the most part, I think it'll get the job done for sure. So if you're in the market, if you want to pick up a phone like this, I'll say go for it if you have it. I would recommend keeping it for as long as you can, but I would recommend going up to a phone like an iPhone XR, maybe an iPhone 11 if you can, go ahead and pull the money for it. But I think the iPhone XR is a great phone that I would recommend to so many people, has so much capability, and honestly, that's probably around that type of phone that I would recommend is an iPhone XR. So that really pretty much covers it up for the most part. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.